Hello. My name's Ed Bridges, and on behalf of all the staff of the archives, I welcome you here today. It's a great pleasure to have you. A lot of longtime friends are here, a lot of friends of Alabama history, people who've been, a lot of historians here, and it's a great pleasure to have you all here. I think you're all in for a treat. Sherry asked me to introduce Hardy since I've really known him longer than any other friend I have in Alabama history. We started out as graduate students in 1971, both working on our doctorates. We were both working on the southern frontier at the end of the 1700s, through the American Revolution. And Hardy was working on his dissertation. I was working on mine. We both crossed paths at the Georgia Department of Archives and History, working through the materials there. And we started a friendship. We've been friends ever since. And I could take a lot of time with some wonderful personal stories. Most of you here have heard Hardy. Many of you are here because you enjoy what an entertaining speaker he is. And there are a lot of kind of fun personal stories. My oldest daughter, when she was 12 years old, after Hardy left, turned to my wife and said, "You know, I think he's probably the most obnoxious of Dad's friends." That came shortly after Hardy had made some comment about teenage girls as surly to bed, surly to rise. About 20 years ago, Hardy's family has a place down on the coast, and Hardy invited some of his history friends to come down, and so a lot of us were down there. We were getting on up there in age, but we were still acting like boys once we got back to the beach, and we were playing frisbee throwing a frisbee back and forth, and I went diving for one and pulled my back out. This was on a Saturday afternoon. And it started spasming, and I was in terrible pain. And we tried to figure out what to do, and they went out to a pharmacy and came back and said the strongest stuff we could find was Advil. And that didn't do much good. So one of the guys said, "I think maybe alcohol may be a good muscle relaxer." So they pulled out a bottle of Evan Williams, and it really helped a lot. The next morning, I was delivered home in the back of a pickup truck on a pad. I still couldn't stand up and walk, and with my bottle of Evan Williams in hand. And Hardy's been telling that story ever since. This is a little bit of a chance for revenge, because if you look at Hardy, he's turning this way now and he's turning this way because he was riding a bicycle and had a fall recently. So he's suffering the same kind of things that he was teasing me about for the last 20 years. Hardy, for those of you, again, many of you already know him. Hardy's a native of Alabama. He grew up in Clark County, attended Birmingham Southern, got his master's degree from the University of Alabama, and he went and taught for a while in Florida before he returned to work on his doctorate. He went to the University of Georgia and started working on his doctorate in 1970, and that's when he and I met. I was starting to work on my degree exactly at the same time. He left after he completed his degree. He went to work teaching at what was then Clayton State College. I think it's now, is it Clayton University? Yeah. And he taught there, was chairman of the department. And then he got a chance to come back home to Alabama. He came back home to be head of the history department at Jacksonville State, has been there now for 25 years.
20, right at somewhere.
And has been a great citizen, a great member of the history community, has written some wonderful books on Alabama history. I think his book on Alabama Rivers, 2 books on Alabama Rivers are wonderful reads. His personal history is also just a really enjoyable and interesting and insightful work on Alabama history. It's one that I really like to recommend and frequently recommend for people who just are coming to Alabama history for the first time and want a fascinating, enjoyable introduction. Hardy was named Eminent Scholar at Jacksonville State in 2008, and he is a great friend, a wonderful historian, and it's a great privilege for me to introduce him today. Thanks, Hardy.
Thank you.
Am I turned on now? I've always wanted to say that. Yes. I also wanted to say je ne sais quoi. I don't know what it means, but it just sounds so good. I was wondering where Ed was going with that, and it could have been a lot of different directions. I'll always remember what his lovely wife said when we brought him in the pickup truck. She said, I sent you off with a perfectly good husband. You bring me back with the drunk who's down in the back. What could I say? Call them like you see them. It is really a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to see so many friends, old and new, and family and kinfolks who will come out and see you. That's just, that's almost frightening. It's wonderful. Modern Alabama. When I think of this, I'm reminded of what Mahatma Gandhi reportedly said when someone asked him what he thought of Western civilization. He mused, Western civilization, it'd be a good idea. Modern Alabama. Well, a little over a year ago, I was invited to participate in this program, and I readily accepted. Like the archives, like things that happen here, it's just great. And then I was given this topic, and I began to, what in the, And so I started thinking about it, and all of a sudden I was asked to submit a paragraph about what I was planning to talk about, something that could be sent in with a grant proposal. Say what? Now, folks, I belong to, or like to think I belong to, what is called the contemplative classes, A bunch of professors and pundits, I try hard to be both, who like to think about a topic for a while, mull over it, ponder, all in the hopes that maybe somewhere I'll come up with something to say about it. Make you think at least I knew what I was talking about. I plan to ponder modern Alabama. Not a chance for that now. They wanted a paragraph right then and there. So without much thought and even less research, this is what I wrote. I'm quoting myself now. I've always wanted to do that too. All right. How do you define modern Alabama? Is it a slice of time, 1945 to the present, in which Alabama became something it wasn't before? Will a comparison of then, pre-1945, and since really define us as modern? Or should we be measured against some abstract standard, concept of modernity, some scholarly checklist of what a state must be and not be, do and not do in order to be modern? On the other hand, I dribbled on, modern might just mean now, where we are today. And my task would be to freeze the state on this day in 2009 and tell you folks in the audience what was going on even as I speak, so you could go outside and see it if you wanted to. Or maybe I should do all these things. Compare us to what we used to be, measure us against what some smart folks say a modern state must be, and reach some sort of a conclusion about what we are today. I think, I wrote then, that is what I will try. We'll see how it turns out. Or doesn't. Which, now that I think about it, is sort of like modern Alabama. Waiting to see. Have you ever heard such a bunch of gibberish? The other submissions must have been pretty good because they got the grant. And here I am today. So after I wrote that, I set to contemplating. Now, what I'm actually going to do may disappoint some of you, which will not be the first time. Those who came to hear me light into leaders who have misled us, lambast institutions that have failed us, and signal out interests that have put self before the good of the state and its people. Sorry, there's not going to be much of that. Those who have come hoping that I will praise leaders who have risen above petty politics, highlight institutions that serve, and applaud interests that sacrifice self for the rest of us, not much of that either. Instead, what I want to do today is to pick out a couple of things that back after the Second World War, Alabamians decided that we could not live without. Things that, maybe perhaps without realizing it, we decided to put at the top of our list of what we need to be modern. And then I'm going to reflect on how getting those things, there's no G on the end of that, you notice, how getting those things have made us different today from what we were when we started out trying to get them. And if what I arrive at is not modern, well, modern we aren't, and it's our own fault. So, what things do I pick out to lead us into modernity? Why don't we begin with asphalt? Today there are Alabamians who have never driven on a dirt road. I think my son may be one of them. When this map was printed, 1939, there were Alabamians who had never driven on a paved one. If you lived in Choctaw County, down in southwest Alabama, you couldn't. Unless you went to Butler, county seat. Other than that, there was not a paved road in Choctaw County in 1939. Other counties had a little more to brag about. Next door in Clark County, there were 15 whole miles of asphalt. A couple of Clark County people down here would recognize that. Same with Wilcox County. Up north in Clay County, they had 10 miles of paved roads. Now, if your county had a U.S. highway running through it in 1939, the federal government had probably paved it. But if your roads were state or county maintained, you rode on dirt. Not that it mattered, at least to most folks, because most folks didn't travel that far. Those roads back then, dirt or paved, city or county, state or federal, connected Alabamians to individuals, friends and neighbors, and to institutions, stores, churches, the courthouse, that were close by. We were not a particularly mobile people. We were a state of stay-at-home folks who did not stray far from hometowns, home places, and neighborhoods. Our hometowns were, for the most, I love this. This is the first time I've done PowerPoint. You need to edit that out, but I'm just having more fun than a pig and slop. Our hometowns were, for the most part, small towns. I'm sure all of you remember Deatsville. Not much of this. Let's say Deatsville, 1944. This was a market center, Elmore County in that area. This was where middle-class professional people worked in small stores, not like this, or in offices, not like this. And the children went to schools with children who were pretty much of the same circumstances and certainly the same race, and where families were mostly evangelical Protestants whose theological differences were generally obscured by the energy with which they worshiped. There's some things you just need to let sink in, aren't there? We Methodists didn't shout much. We were not part of the Methodist shouting, all right? Though these towns, I ought to give a quiz in here. Do you know where this is? It's like, what was the one, where's Carmen Angelito or whatever it was? Anyway, this is sunny South, for those of you who are wondering. These towns may have varied for their reasons of being, mill towns, county seats, crossroads, railroad crossings and such, but they were places where people of different classes, but remarkably similar minds, lived and loved and had their being in semi-isolated, island to themselves splendor, 6 days of the week, 7 days. Then Saturday came, and everything changed. On Saturday, the small town 6-day quiet was broken by the sound of an in-migration from the countryside. Like an invading army they came, slowly, deliberately, on dusty pre-Jim Folsom dirt roads, country folks off to town to buy whatever they could not get at the crossroads stores, back around close to the home place. Once they were there in town, I can go backwards, I like this. Once they were there in town, they could socialize with the same folks they would sit together with in their churches back home on Sunday. Two communities, small town, no town, joined in a social and economic union that sustained them both. Yes, the countryside from which these visitors came was also a community, just as surely as the towns. Back there in the countrysides, they were served by the small stock furnishing merchants from store shelves, the entire content of which could, and sometime was, fit into the back of an adapted truck and rolled off to sell. These country folks knew the owner, and he knew them. So the day-to-day staples that sustained them could be bought on credit when needed, as needed, and paid for when the cotton came in. One of the last vestiges of the crop lien system that hamstrung Alabama agriculture during the first half of the century. The leaders of these countryside communities had much in common with those they led. Held in high regard were the bivocational preachers who worked behind the plow during the week, like most country folks did, and worked the pulpit on Sunday. Equally respected for the women, and it was almost always women, who taught in the one-room, two-room schools scattered around the community, convenient for keeping the young folks close to home, at least until they reached 5th or 6th grade. At that point, the more affluent families would send their children to town to be educated, while the others would be sent into the fields with all the education they would have. And in Alabama, anecdotal evidence, which of course we all know is the best kind, suggests that the education of black students ended sooner than their white counterparts, but not always. And at the top of the leadership ladder were the large landowners, planters, who singularly and combination also owned the crossroads stores, the gin next to them, probably the grist mill down on the creek. They served as beat supervisor, justice of the peace, postmaster, and election commissioner, and together and separately constituted the fountainhead, if not of law, then at least of advice for all those who knew them. To paraphrase William Faulkner's description of one of them, though no milder man ever bled a mule or stuffed a ballot box, it was considered, to put it mildly, bad luck for someone in the neighborhood to do his trading or gin his cotton or grind his meal or shoe his stock anywhere else but in the establishments they owned. And there you have it. Small town, no town. And then there were the cities, if you want to call them that. When this map was drawn, 1939, Alabama cities, even Mobile, Birmingham, were essentially small towns writ large. In them, neighborhoods, black and white, 5 Points, Enon Ridge, Spring Hill, Davis Avenue, Cloverdale, Centennial Hill, were themselves core communities with homes and churches and stores and shops. Like country folks who would go to town on Saturday, residents of city neighborhoods would go downtown for that weekly, sometime monthly, sometimes seasonally shopping spree, and other than that, unless work demanded it, they didn't move around much. Mobile we were not, but were we modern? Well, as we tend to say in my family when asked for a progress report, we were getting there. In the 2 decades that followed this map, change, both subtle and dramatic, altered Alabama's social, political, and economic and physical landscape. The Civil Rights Movement, smoldering in black communities, burst into flame with Brown versus Board of Education and the Montgomery bus boycott, already well covered by this series. By the end of the 1950s, serious social change was underway. And despite the best, or you might say the worst, efforts of white Alabamians, it was unstoppable. The federal government, whose presence before World War II was mostly evident in New Deal agencies and paved roads, after the conflict ended, Washington altered dramatically the social landscape in other ways. With the GI Bill, more Americans got an education. More Alabamians got an education, bought a home, and had their ticket punched for the middle class. They also got better jobs, and with their earnings acquired symbols of middle-class affluence, the most obvious being the automobile. And with automobiles came mobility. But who wants to drive a hard-worked-for, bought-on-time automobile on rutted roads that could turn a car into a rattletrap? So Alabamians demanded asphalt, and they got it. Say what you will about the populist overtones of Big Jim Folsom's paving push. Had county folks, country folks not gotten automobiles and not become automobile owners, their enthusiasm for asphalt would have been considerably less. When the paving began, things really began to change. But become modern? Getting there. Although Big Jim roads, the rural roads, the farm-to-market roads, were just a drop in the bucket compared to the largesse showered on the state by federal highway projects, nevertheless, when it came to greasing the wheels of Alabama politics, state and local roads were the meat on which our Caesars fed. During the Folsom years, any politician who did not relish explaining to his constituents why their road wasn't paved knew they had to get the ear of Big Jim operatives Rankin Fight, the House Speaker, Fuller Kimbrell, his finance director, and floor leaders George Hawkins and Joe Dawkins. For, as one of the poetic wags rhymed it up, Hawkins, Dawkins, Kimbrell, and Fight, if you want a road, you better vote right. As years passed, governors and legislators came and went, but the principle remained the same. But it was not the roads, not really, or even the politics that paved them in one place and not another, that became avenues to a modern Alabama. Nor really was it the automobiles we drove there. It was what began to happen once the paving was done and the driving commenced. We moved. And with us, Alabama moved. Now, although there had been already a steady drift away from the countryside to the towns and to the cities ever since World War I, a corresponding shift from the cities to the suburbs was also taking place. And these changes, the changes that these relocations wrought, were scarcely evident, though, in the 50s and 60s to those living there. Country folks still came to town, just like they always had, but with better roads and cheap gas. Yes, I remember 20 cents a gallon gas in 1959. The trips were more frequent. Politicians, aware of this mobility, focused their attention on the towns, held rallies to coincide with shopping trips. I had to put this one in there. This is George Wallace in downtown Grove Hill, Alabama. And if you look carefully, Jimmy, if you look carefully, doll, if you look carefully, Catherine, you're going to recognize some of the people up there. Are you there? Me. At the same time, also thanks to the federal government whose farm policies favored what we call today agribusiness and worked to the disadvantage of small farmers, more and more rural folks were living on their home place, but driving to work at a variety of industries in or near towns. This, you might imagine, pumped money into town economies, for it made sense to shop where you worked. However, this took commerce away from crossroads stores that had served rural communities for decades. Slowly but surely, one by one, their customers drove by without stopping and shopping, and the stores closed. This economic consolidation paralleled another consolidation that decimated rural communities. Better transportation led to the closing of little schools that once dotted the landscape. And long before busing became a racially charged issue, white and black children were being bused to their in-town consolidated schools, often riding by closed schools that had once served the children of their communities, where they were being taken to schools that were far from their homes and from their families. It was no small disconnect, for as schools were consolidated, family attention shifted down the road to where the parents already went to work, already shopped, and where now their children were going. And because it was easier to get there on decent roads by car, school bus, and truck, there was where the people went. By the last quarter of the century, you could see the skeletal remains scattered across Alabama's rural landscape. Country stores that were once community centers lost their business, not just on Saturday, but during the week. Recognize that place? Whiteley, Alabama. And country schools, once the pride and personal possession of country folks, were boarded up and allowed to rot. Integration hastened the process as clapboard black schools were shut down and the students moved to white institutions, which produced a corresponding exodus of white students to SAG academies. Some of these SAG academies, by the way, purposely and with no sense of irony, opened in white schools culled by consolidation. Meanwhile, more roads were paved, heavily subsidized by the same federal government that many white Alabamians were claiming was destroying their way of life. The same federal government that black Alabamians were thanking for offering them a way of life that did not sentence them to second-class citizenship. The increasing availability of motorized transportation and good roads on which to travel, put advocates of economic growth without social change at odds with themselves. Where once small towns all across America went to great lengths to get a railroad routed through them, in the 1930s and 40s, Alabama town boosters touted the advantages of having a federal, or at the least a state highway, cutting right through the middle of their commercial district. However, as traffic increased, small town city fathers began to advocate bypasses that would take pesky through traffic, big trucks and all that, around downtowns and relieve the congestion that those same city fathers felt discouraged drive-in shoppers on whom small town economies depended. Through traffic truckers supported bypasses, so it looked like a win-win situation. But it wasn't. Instead of driving into less congested small town market centers, people from the countryside drove by. So small town businesses seeking to recapture this commuting trade moved out to the bypass and left the core of the old community to slowly decline. Anybody know where this is? Pineapple, Alabama, just off the interstate. A comparable phenomenon was happening in American cities. As people moved to the suburbs, stores and shops that once served inner city neighborhoods moved with them and settled in shopping malls, some stripped, some under a single roof, with acres of paved parking for commuters who drove in to shop. Going with them to the suburbs were large department stores that once anchored downtown commerce. This left a less mobile central city population disconnected from the more affluent suburbs and underserved by commerce conducted there. But you don't need slides for that. You don't even need the map that was provided for you, even though you might want to consult it if you haven't already. You've seen it. The result for Alabama, as for much of the nation, has been a decline of small towns and inner city neighborhoods, which, though being reversed in some places, is generally the landscape of modern Alabama, if not indeed modern America. Which brings us to another interesting situation. Alabama is a conservative state. By some measures, one of the most conservative in the Union. And among its conservative values is an attachment to place that also exceeds much of the rest of the nation. Surveys show that Alabama is also one of the sticky states, a state where people continue to live within driving distance of the place they call home. Moreover, if Alabamians leave the state, they come back to live more frequently than most. I stand here as an example of that. I can pick out a few more examples out there, and I'll bet you know a few too. You might be one yourself. While some of this is the natural result of less education, college graduates move farther and more frequently than high school graduates, who are themselves more mobile than those who drop out, and Alabama has fewer of the first two groups and more of the last. Studies show that preference has a lot to do with where Alabamians live when they have a choice. However, choice not only dictates a place of residence, it also dictates how the chooser, the Alabamian, shapes the social and economic community of which he or she is a part. And once again, we come to asphalts and automobiles. Not only have those two forces enabled schools to consolidate and other communities to reconfigure, they have confirmed this shift by consolidating religious activity as well. And we all know what having a church home means to Alabamians. Y'all got to have one. In place of the little churches that once dotted our landscape, today we find larger churches in town for country folks, in or near suburbs for suburbanites. They constitute a whole new core community, sometimes building on existing churches, other times rising to collect people out of the cul-de-sacs and create a community for them. Give suburban Alabamians a mall with all the stores they need, a church that can fill their social, recreational, and in some cases spiritual needs, and schools that they teach their children whatever they want them taught, and you have small-town Alabama writ large and ideal. All of it, of course, in convenient driving distance of where those suburbanites live and work. Meanwhile, the same thing's happening out in the countryside. Having watched their crossroads stores shut and shuttered because clientele found it easier to trade in town where they worked, having seen local schools consolidated away from them, having seen so many drive in town on Sunday for what bigger churches could offer, rural folks may have wondered whether or not they were losing a community connection that once sustained their lives. Not to fear. Happily, their worries have been salved by the arrival on the scene, or at least at the bypass, of what is, for small towns, the equivalent of a mall or suburb. Walmart. Now, I'm not here today to go off on a tirade against what my children once called the big blue toy store. Instead, I want to consider Walmart not as a destroyer of small-town countryside way of life, but rather as the resurrection, sustaining, and preserving of it. As surely as asphalt and automobiles spell the end of crossroad communities throughout Alabama, asphalt and automobiles offered these folks a way to get out of what was once, for many, an economically, socially limited environment and into some place, any place, where choices, social and economic, were wider. Walmart, or in some places Kmart, or for the more upscale of you, Target, or Target for those of you who are more sophisticated, they all offer the advantages of a small town under one roof, plus some exotic alternatives, maybe a Mexican or a Chinese restaurant close by. Golly. There it is, within easy driving and easy parking, strategically located, providing for country and small town folks what suburban malls provide for suburban dwellers, at a better price than they could be found at the in-town market center dry good and country stores that had once been the crushing competition for the stores back at the countryside, at the crossroads. Even as they pull customers away from hometown downtowns, these market center Walmarts have created new downtowns, which, because of the automobile and asphalt, have reconfigured Alabama's economic landscape, particularly in a place like my home county, Clark County. A few years ago, I saw some statistics on counties that generate more sales tax than you would expect from a county of that size of population. And stuck in there in the middle of suburban counties with mega malls like the Galleria and so on was Clark County, Alabama. Now why, I asked myself, was a rural county in the Pine Belt, a county whose population was not much greater now than it had been when I left 4 decades ago, a move some said not only improved the county's collective IQ, but its moral character as well. Why would such a county generate so much in retail sales? Simple. Because at either end of the county, in Jackson to the south and Thomasville to the north, were Walmarts. Not just any Walmart, but super Walmarts. Everything under one roof. And at these Walmarts, history repeats itself. In they come, just like in the old days. Cars bought on easy credit on roads built with mostly federal money to park and shop in the new communities. County lines and city limits mean little except when the sales taxes are collected. In they come, past Pine Hill, Sunny South, Leroy, Lower Peachtree, past Walmart County seats where the courthouse, set there in pre-asphalt, pre-automobile days of yore, is now the town's only, or at least major, economic engine. Today, they are once thriving market centers so bereft of commerce that there's no longer a store where a man can buy a dress shirt or a Sunday suit and where his wife can find an Easter frock. Today, they are county seats where the most prosperous business, apart from lawyers and healthcare agencies, are the drugstores for the less mobile old folks and the automobile repair shops to keep them running so the mobile people can drive away. Meanwhile, at Walmart on Saturday morning, go down sometime and watch it. It's fun. On Saturday morning, country folks come in, get a biscuit at the deli, sit at the bench with folks they will sit in the pews with on Sunday, And when they come back, and then they will come back to town, sit with on Sunday in surviving rural churches, or when they come back into town to worship the Lord in the beauty of holiness. And when the day is done, they will return home to watch TV on the dish. If Walmart added a church and a school, the transition would be complete. As asphalt and automobiles have wrought even more, modern Alabama has become, and as Alabama becomes postmodern, we can see the future taking shape. Where once market centers were places within a day's drive, round trip, of most countryside, and where now Walmart communities are closer than that, today rural residents, though far from big cities, are driving an hour or more, one way, for a Saturday shopping session, lunch, and a movie at an interstate exit mall in Montgomery, or Mobile, or Hoover, or Oxford, or Tuscaloosa, or Huntsville, or such. Leaving hometowns and downtowns, and even occasionally a Walmart, isolated and alone. Today, most Alabamians live within 100 miles of a major interstate exit mall. And despite high gas prices, increasingly Alabamians, especially the more affluent Alabamians, are making the trip. And increasingly, those malls have become our cities, just as the big blue stores have become our small towns, at least for now. Modern Alabama. Now, of course, it would be wrong to credit or blame automobiles and asphalt for making Alabama what it is today. A host of other factors have played into the process. However, it is difficult to deny, or at least for me to deny, that without automobiles and asphalt, the ride to the future would have been much slower and much bumpier. And those making the trip would have been fewer. Once giving the option of mobility, Alabamians, conservative, stay-at-home Alabamians, began to move. Most did not move far, but even short distances reconfigured both the physical and social landscape of the state. So are we modern? Getting there, and on paved roads and in automobiles. Thank you very much.
We have time for questions. Please speak directly into the microphone if you want to ask a question of Dr. Jackson. And raise your hand. We will get the microphone to you. Do we have a question now?
Everybody's ready to go shopping.
Harvey, I just was thinking about my 80-something-year-old mother who got into her car and drove to Alabama and drove to Walmart. And she would get lost in the stores, but she loved it. I don't think I need this. I have a big mouth. But the point, I love the focus that you've taken this to. I would never have thought of asphalt as having been the primary mover in Alabama.
Don't you hate to go to a parking lot that's got potholes in it? You know,
yeah,
what would it be so much?
like
You remember when we used to go to the drive-in? It was dirt. No, we don't want to go there, do we?
No, I really like what you brought in about the Walmart, and it really did make me think about my white-haired little mother who would drive 17 miles and just to go to Walmart regularly. That was her entertainment.
And now we're building automobiles in Alabama. Is that the next step?
And is the building of automobiles you know, I bought a car. Let me just put it this way. I bought a car with a Japanese name about 6 months ago, and I checked to make sure it was built in Lincoln, Alabama. The love affair that Alabamians have with automobiles, Southerners, Americans in general, but Alabamians in particular, has been documented in some studies that just show that really, even if people don't plan to drive far, they want something that sort of shows the status that they have. I don't know what's going to happen in the long range for Alabama's automobile industry, but I think we'll support it. Yes.
It appears that you could say we've gone about as far as we can go in terms of asphalting the roads and everybody having cars. Have we reached the point of saturation in roads and vehicles? And if so, what's the next big thing? Is the internet going to have a huge influence on Alabama and modernity in Alabama?
I am absolutely amazed at the people that are on the internet, including myself, and some of whom I stay in contact with almost daily who are in this audience right now, and they ought to see them twice and maybe two or three times a year. If the internet may very well be, and if it is, it's going to be a way to get around some of the. I don't think anything is going to change the large suburban mall anytime soon, but I'm amazed at how many Walmarts are closed. We passed some of them driving down here today, and it's and I use Walmart as what is the most obvious example, but in other parts of the country it certainly is a Kmart or a Target or whatever. We want convenience. And we actually are not afraid to spend a little bit more money for convenience. But the problem is there's a lot of people in Alabama who don't have money for convenience and who don't have the internet. And they are the ones who are getting lost in the shuffle of this. I came through two cities coming down, towns, county seat towns, one of them thriving, bustling, because of the proximity to a major road. The other one out in the middle of nowhere, and literally the courthouse is the only thing left. And for the people there, I didn't even see a grocery store. And it's we are dislocating. This process, modern though it may be, is dislocating a lot of people. And I don't know what the next step is going to be. Yes.
Harvey, a thought that was going through my mind is with the discussion. I think there's an interplay there. To a very large extent, in our lifetimes, the Industrial Revolution had been brought to this state, and the state has made a great effort to bring industry to the state, and I think a great deal of success has been achieved, and I think that fits. That's a part of the picture that you're painting.
Yeah, it's a lot of this, and it's hard for me to say which causes which. A lot of this is the industry we brought in is the fact that we have infrastructure, or at least we have the ability to put some in place very quickly and the willingness to spend money to do it. One of the things that always fascinates me, if you ever go to Camden and want to go to Camden to Pine Hill, you go over a marvelous bridge, wonderful bridge. That for years those people wanted that bridge built. And it wasn't until they found out that they could get a paper mill in there that we built that bridge. So, in some cases we have to create the infrastructure. In a lot of other cases, all of this asphalt is creating the infrastructure right now. And we've, some of the plants, Mercedes was not located where it's located because there were dirt roads. So in a sense we're feeding on that by building all of this. I haven't bought a Mercedes. You notice I said it was built in Lincoln. It wasn't built in Mercedes. Anything else? Oh.
We have one question in the back.
Are we on? I guess a lot of the asphalt and automobile progress was enabled by cheap gasoline, and if that non-renewable resource becomes far more scarce and the price shoots up, the suburbanization that we've been able to have and the ability to travel that far seems like it would go in reverse. Have you thought any about that direction?
First of all, being a historian, I can fall back on the future with absolutely no fear, because it means nothing to me. But no, I have actually, and something rather remarkable has happened in all places in Jacksonville, Alabama this year. We have gotten mass transit. Now, it was designed to move students around, to cut down on the congestion around, but part of the grant that we got said that we also had to serve the community. And so these buses go out and they pick up people at the senior center, they pick up people on street corners, they pick up people at downtown, and the farthest out stop they have on their route is Walmart. I need to get the figures on where most people go. I don't think it's to my classes, but anyway.
A Walmart is going into China now. It would be a good time to buy stock.
I don't know over the last few years whether there's a bad time to have bought Walmart stock. And of course, that's why I don't have any. If you ever want to, good advice on what to buy, check with me and then don't buy what I bought.
Do we have one more question? If not, Dr. Jackson will be here for a few minutes after the program if you would like to speak with him. Also, if you purchased a book from the Friends Gift Shop, he will be glad to autograph that for you. They're available in the lobby.
This goes to the Will Jackson, Anna Jackson Scholarship Fund.
And inside your program is an evaluation form. This program is sponsored by the Alabama Humanities Foundation, a grant from them, and we would like for you to complete the evaluation form and turn it into our volunteers on your way out. Thank you so much for coming today.